Thank you very much, and I want to just thank the Ambedkar King Study Circle and all the sponsoring organizations for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. As was mentioned, I'm with the Dr. Martin Luther King Legacy Committee, and the connection there is that one of the tenets that I've always held is that Dr. Martin Luther King was, among all Americans, was really a great revolutionary leader, and that it is Dr. Ambedkar. Often, when India and the U.S. are compared, people talk about King and they talk about Gandhi. But when I think of who is the most comparable to Dr. King in India, I think it is Dr. Ambedkar. And the reason for the significance of Dr. Ambedkar, of course, is because he recognized both class as well as caste as major social contradictions for the Indian people, and of course that is among others, such as patriarchy and all the other social contradictions. And one of the things that's happening today in both India and the United States is we have a supremacist president or prime minister who is in power, who essentially represents a supremacist position of the dominant sectors of society, whether it is whites and males for Donald Trump, or upper caste Hindus for Mr. Modi. And although these two leaders are themselves not directly racist or casteist, they do not condemn actions by their own followers whenever there are, for example, violent acts, and obviously they're not going to champion the rights of the underclasses as well as oppressed communities. And so there is a general consensus that there has been a rise in for example, hate crimes in both of these countries during the tenure of Mr. Trump here and Mr. Modi in India. And to give you an example, so what if we look at the hate crimes? Take for example the hate crimes in the United States. So the Justice Department released some data for I believe it's 2018, and that data, or 2017, the 2017 data show that, and of course this is incomplete because again, hate crimes, the statistics that we have for hate crimes are only for those hate crimes that are actually reported, where there are, in this case, in the US case, where actual police reports are filed, and where that crime can definitively be classified as a hate crime. There are lots of hate incidents where the data are insufficient. They can't prove that it's a hate crime, and so they're not included. So this is going to be, of course, a gross undercount. So what matters is not the absolute numbers, although we see that they are increasing. But I think what's significant for our purposes here is what are the ratios. So if you take all the hate crimes that were reported officially, using the official statistics of the Justice Department, we find that 58% of them are acts that are based on racial or ethnic hatred. Okay, and another 22% are based on religion. And of course, when we think about it, when you sort of broaden this perspective, it's in some ways these two categories, there's a gray edge between these two categories. So if we put them all together, if we take the ethnic and racial hatred hate crimes and the religious hate crimes, put them together, they comprise 90%, 58 plus 22 is 90%. 90% of the hate crimes in the United States are based upon these two types of hate crimes. And it's true, religion is a matter of self-identification, but to the person who is committing the act, it's a perception. It's a question of what's in his mind, right? And what's in his mind, again, is fundamentally a social construct, because it may or may not be right. And so it's this prejudice that's based on social constructs that comprises 90% of the hate crimes that are happening in the United States. And that's why race and all of that racial or social constructs are very important when we look at social justice and equality in this country. Now, in India, there's a report that was released by Amnesty International, and again, the data are a tiny sampling of the reality. But so again, I'm not going to focus on the absolute numbers because there are only like 700, 800 in their sample. But what's important is the ratios, and the ratio shows that 70% of the hate crimes that were reported that were in this Amnesty International database for the years 2015 to 2018 were hate crimes against Dalits. 70% were against Dalits, and another 20% were against Muslims. Okay, and again, what's important is what was in the mind of the person who was doing the hate crime, and that person had a perception that, okay, this person looks like a Muslim, so I'm going to attack him, or this person, I have some information that he or she is a Dalit, and we're going to attack him. And then there's of those incidents, particularly of those incidents, there's a pretty big number that were also, it turns out, what they call cow-related. So in other words, it had something to do with an accusation that person was doing, harming or killing a cow. So anyway, so that suggests to us that a lot of these incidents were done by upper caste Hindus. So anyway, these are the dimensions of the problem. But let's go beyond hate crimes, because after all, hate crimes, even though they are rising, even though they are very alarming, they only affect a small percentage of the population. Very few of us will actually be a victim of a hate crime, particularly one that results in injury or death. So, in terms of how people are faring, one of the things that Dr. Ambedkar did was to, write into the Indian Constitution clauses that recognize the fundamental equality of Dalits and scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and everyone in India, no matter what community they come from. So in effect, the discrimination against Dalits and other minorities in India was abolished in the Constitution. But these communities still are at a very disadvantaged position. And one of the things that was achieved by reservations was that Dalits and scheduled tribes and lower castes, Muslims, were able to get positions. First of all, they were able to get seats in the universities, okay, and they were able to get jobs in the public sector, the government jobs in state-owned enterprises. But there has been very little change in terms of their penetration into private enterprises, which comprise, after all, the vast bulk of the jobs in the Indian economy. And so this is one aspect of which goes to the point of this conference, which is talking about Dr. Ambedkar and state socialism. Of course, what I would say is that what we have in India is not state socialism. Rather, it is state-owned enterprises. Forget about government. Government is not socialism, but state-owned enterprises in a capitalist system are just that. They are state-owned. The profits from state-owned enterprises do not go into anyone's private pocket, except to the extent that there's corruption. And these state-owned enterprises, for example, one of the big things is that state-owned enterprises in India are much more willing to accept trade unions. So the number of workers in trade unions in public sector enterprises is still quite high, and it's being sustained. Whereas in the private sector, trade unionism has declined very, very dramatically, both in India and in the United States. So there are a lot of advantages, that are there in state-owned enterprises, but it's not socialism. But nevertheless, it is important to make that distinction that there are certain ways in which state-owned enterprises are advantageous in terms of social benefits, in terms of disseminating human rights to its workers and to its customers. So Dalits, for example, have made progress in the public sector, but they have not in the private sector. And of course, we can see this from our own experience, that if we go into a small shop and ask, who's working in the shop, it tends to be family members. And if it's not family members, it is people who belong to the same community as the owners of that shop. Okay. So, some of my friends said that, but what about if we go to big companies? If we go to big companies, which are, as my uncle in Delhi used to say, you're looking at all these small sort of family-owned enterprises, and they're not very, in his words, business-like. He said, so go and see some of the bigger companies, and this is many, many years ago. Go to Mumbai, and it's a little more business-like. So I went there, and of course one finds that even in larger companies, you have the same pattern, is that whoever controls the company tends to hire people from the same community. And even some of the most liberal capitalists in India, like the Tatas, right? They have given a lot of benefits to their employees, but still, when Ratan Tata stepped down from the chairmanship of Tatas, he gave the helm to Cyrus and Street, another Parsi. So it stayed within the Parsi community. And it's only now that, after more than a century, that Natarajan Chandrasekharan is the first non-Parsi to be the president of Tatas. So then the question is, then a lot of people looked at, maybe it's better to go to a multinational. If a multinational sets up a plant in India, then they will bring the practices of the multinationals from the West, and they won't be so casteist. And it turns out that people have done some studies about this and found out that still, even in multinational enterprises in India, the top leadership in particular is still very much centered around upper caste, or one set of castes and communities. And it has to do with just the way that top leadership functions, and it tends to fill the top posts with people from their own community. So, yes, there's an issue about individual casteism from individuals, the need for a whatever you want to call it, maybe a cultural revolution in India, just like what we need here in the US. We thought that, under Obama, a lot of people said, well, we have entered a post-racial America. And of course they were wrong. And so what we need here in America is also a cultural revolution that really overthrows white supremacy and the constructs of racism. So yes, we need that. I want to do a little experiment here, which is to just pose the question, and you can answer it for yourself. That how many times have you been in a group, and someone comes along, and turns to you and which is not on the basis of anything that you have said, nothing that you have. It's not based upon your knowledge or your occupation, and turns to you and says, who are you, or where are you from, or and it focuses on you because you're in this mixed group, and you're different from the rest. And it's happened to me so many times because of this viewing me as an individual as being an other instead of just simply one of us. And so that sort of illustrated to me how this question of social constructs keeps on raising its ugly head in a discriminatory way. Now, all of this, you see, I have many friends who are Marxists, who always tell me about the need for a working class party. They say that class is fundamental, so we have to fight our struggles on the basis of a working class leadership. That this has to be from the working class. And I say yes, but there are all these other social contradictions that in no way are encompassed by a purely working class struggle. Yes, we want to try to bring these together, to forge them into a single stream of struggle. But unless we recognize that race and caste and gender and now gender identity and many other things are also obstacles to us moving forward with equality, unless we realize those and we consciously struggle for them, and we do not just drive for equal rights, because equal rights is not going to achieve it, right? Reservations played a crucial role. Affirmative action in the United States played a crucial role. And that's what it's going to take to move forward. So I think that class is we have class and all these contradictions that we have to deal with in a movement. I'm very proud that we have on May 1st we have a May Day, International Workers' Day coalition that has been organizing a May Day march every year since 2006. I think most of you heard about it, but I want to tell you a little bit about it for just in case there are a few of you who may not be so familiar with how this got started. And you'll see the connection in a moment. May Day, so International Workers' Day, May Day, is celebrated all over India, and the trade unions play a major role in May Day, and the left parties. And May Day is known throughout most of the world. So in more than like 3/4 of the countries of the world, May Day is a major holiday. And in the United States, is one of the few countries where it isn't. And yet, May Day was actually born in the United States in 1886 in Chicago. And it was born out of the struggle of immigrant workers who were struggling for the 8-hour workday. Nothing more than that. And they marched on May 1st down Michigan Avenue in Chicago. That was the first May Day. And so when there was a bill in the U.S. Congress in 2005, December. It was called the Sensenbrenner Bill, or H.R. 4437. And 4437 threatened to criminalize not only undocumented immigrants, but also the families of undocumented immigrants who housed them, fed them, landlords who rented to undocumented immigrants, employers who employed undocumented immigrants would all have been criminalized. And so there was tremendous pressure to protest against this. And so there were marches. There was a big march in many cities on March 25th of 2006, and then April 10th, and then they decided, the national grouping decided that, well, we have to do a big one, and what day will we pick? And so they chose May 1st because they knew that most immigrants know the meaning of International Workers' Day. And that's how it was born. So we had May 1st, we had the largest political demonstration in the history of San Jose on May 1st, 2006. And it was more than 250,000 people who marched here in San Jose for May 1st. And it was about immigrants, but it was also about workers. And in the 13, 14 years since then, it has become more of a march for both. And it's also not just about workers, it's also about communities, about communities of color. And so there's been a great effort to bring in all the different communities of color, because communities of color are most severely impacted. And we see under the current president, that race is again an issue. And so whatever it is, we stand together. Thank you.